Welcome to the Dibley Diaries for this week. This week we're going to be thinking about the story where Jesus feeds his disciples at the lakeside. And for the Rural Challenge this week, I'd like to think about what we as church communities feed people, both literally and kind of spiritually as well. So when we give people food, do we give people food that is always a value thing, like a cheapest version of what we can do? Are we encouraging people to come for just a cup of tea and a value custard cream? Now, it may be that is all that your church community can afford, but if you can afford a little more, could you in some way reflect more the generosity of God in what you are giving to people? Can you reflect the generosity of God in what you are giving to people when you feed them? And then I was thinking about this spiritually as well. How is it that we feed people spiritually? And I ended up thinking about the fruits of the Spirit in this context, joy, peace, love, kindness, generosity, self-control, patience, all those fruit of the Spirit. How is it that we are feeding people in our church community and those who come into our contact with our church community? How are we feeding them the spiritual fruit as well? So why is this more difficult in rural communities than into urban communities? Well, our facilities are the problem in many places. So there might be no running water, there might be nowhere to prepare anything. You might not even have any space for a table or a flat service on which to serve food and drinks. My encouragement would be, please think imaginatively about how you could actually do that, how you can make people feel welcome and serve them things which are appropriate, generous and welcoming in those situations. I know many churches where people lovingly take hot water in flasks, cold water in bottles. There's nowhere to do washing up, so they take the cups and saucers home in a crate, or they use some sort of disposable cups. How can we celebrate the hospitality of Jesus within our own church communities? How can we be generous in our hospitality for people, reflecting Jesus' generosity for his disciples? Thought for the week this week is based on the Bible passage, the Gospel passage for the week, John chapter 21 verses 1 to 19. I love this passage. I love this passage on all sorts of levels. When I'm talking to children about it in a collective worship or a different sort of setting, then I ask them, do you know what Jesus ate? What do you think Jesus would eat? And we have a little discussion about the things that he might have eaten, things that he wouldn't been able to eat, all those sorts of things. And then I ask them, what do you know? What do we know that Jesus could cook? What do we know that Jesus could cook? And actually the only things that we know for certain Jesus could cook were bread and fish. And we hear that in the Bible reading for today. So the disciples are, confused, grieving, upset. Some of them go back to the lake and go out to fish. I mean, that's going home to what they know, isn't it? They go back to the lake and they go to fish. They haven't caught anything all night, and as they're coming into shore, they're tired and they're dejected, and then a stranger on the shore says to them, oh, no, throw your net over the other side. And there's a bit of complaining, but they do throw their net over the other side, and there's a huge catch of fish. Then Peter realises it's Jesus, so Peter puts on his clothes, jumps into the water and goes to greet Jesus. And just as well, he finds that Jesus has already lit a fire and grilled some fish and made some bread. And I just love this idea. I love this kind of hospitality of Jesus. Jesus has some really serious theological work to do with the disciples, and especially with Peter in particular. But the first thing he does is make them breakfast. He makes them bread and fish, and they bring some more fish from the catch that they've just caught, and they they cook it on the fire which Jesus has made. Looking at it this week, I'm like, Peter must have had really wet clothing at this point. He would have been needing to dry out by the fire. Then, in the conversation that Jesus had with Peter, which we have reported, Jesus talks to Peter about leading the church, and he gives him 3 instructions. He says, feed my lambs, tend my sheep, and feed my sheep. He talks about feeding. So Jesus has this difficult work to do with Peter. After all, it's part of the discussion about Peter coming back to him after denying him. So he has this difficult thing, but Jesus knows when they get off the lake, what they need is bread and fish. When they get off the lake, what they need is breakfast and a fire, and Jesus provides that for them. I think it's a really interesting challenge for us as individuals and a church community. If we want to ask ourselves the question, what would Jesus do? What would Jesus do when he has to have a really difficult spiritual conversation, when he has to deal with people who are grieving and confused and don't know what's going on in their lives? He makes them bread and fish. He cooks for them. Now, it may be that people in your church community do actually need bread and fish. Or it may be that there's something else that people need as part of these difficult spiritual conversations to comfort the grieving, all those sorts of things. So if you want to ask yourself, what would Jesus do? Well, he would make them bread and fish as he did for his disciples. What is the equivalent of that for you in your church community and your wider community? The Dibley Moment of the week this week is about onion gravy. I was working while I was still training with a vicar, and we were in a meeting, and he said, I can't do anything this afternoon because I've got to make the onion gravy. And I was a bit surprised, but he went on to explain, well, it's for the sausage and mash supper in the church hall tonight. I always make the onion gravy. That's the thing that I love to cook for them, and they ask me to do. So I thought about that when I was thinking, well, what could Jesus cook, and what could that vicar cook? Onion gravy was his speciality. Well, that's it for the Dibley Diaries for this week. I pray that you and your village, however large or small, have a really blessed week where you can feed and sustain each other and your community.